For weeks, I thought I was losing my mind. Dropped calls, buffering videos, failed uploads. Until one night, I checked my Wi-Fi and found 8 devices. I live alone. It started with a pause, a stutter on the screen, a frozen smile mid-sentence, then the spinning wheel, that cursed little circle we all pretend we're used to, but which still makes your chest tighten, especially when your boss is on the other end of the call. "Jamie, are you there?" I was, technically, but Zoom had other ideas. The screen unfroze, then froze again. Audio glitch, lost connection, then black. I stared at my laptop, swallowing a familiar frustration. The kind that doesn't come from just a bad signal, but from things going wrong when they matter most. It wasn't the first time this had happened that week, and I knew it wasn't the internet provider. I pay for top-tier speed, fiber optic, no kids in the house, no smart fridges. Downloading firmware at midnight. Just me. And even I wasn't doing much, just a laptop and a phone. Still, things kept slowing down. Calls dropped. Files took forever to upload. My connection blinked like a dying light bulb. Small stuff, really, but enough to pull a thread that led somewhere darker. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed with my laptop warming my thighs, and the hallway light casting shadows across the wall. I logged into my router settings. I hadn't done that in months. As the admin panel loaded, I sipped stale chamomile tea and told myself I was being paranoid, and then I saw it. 8 devices, connected, right now. I stared at the screen for a solid minute. Laptop, phone, that's 2. The rest? Names I didn't recognize. Samsung TV 5091. Galaxy Tab A7. Echo.living. I don't own a Samsung TV, or a tablet, or an Echo. My heart sank. My skin went cold. I clicked through each listing, checking MAC addresses, trying to make sense of it. And that's when it hit me. Someone was using my Wi-Fi. That small, simple realization felt disproportionately personal. Like someone had crawled in, through a side window, and made themselves comfortable in my living room. I live alone in a quiet duplex outside Portland. Work remote. No roommates, no partners. Just me and my routines. Coffee at 6:45, inbox 0 by 9, podcasts while I meal prep, yoga twice a week in the tiny back sunroom I turned into a studio. This space, my space, it's all I had after what I walked away from. I'm Jamie, by the way, 36, systems manager for a startup, formerly married, long-heeled, or so I thought. I bought this place after the divorce. My ex and I had built a life that looked good in photos. Big loft, brunches, shared playlists, and passive-aggressive texts about dishes in the sink. When it ended, I didn't want noise. I wanted walls that were mine, a lock I controlled, peace that didn't feel borrowed. That's what this house became. And now someone had slipped inside. Not physically, but intimately. Wi-Fi is like plumbing. You don't think about it until something backs up, but once it does, you can't ignore the smell. That night, I changed the password. New SSID, the private network do not connect. I added symbols, random numbers, something no one could guess. I restarted the router, checked the list, just 2 devices, mine. I exhaled. For a moment, I felt okay, but peace is a funny thing. Sometimes it fools you. 2 nights later, the spinning wheel came back. Video calls froze. My VPN dropped. Not again. I logged in. 5 devices, not mine. The SSID had been changed back to NETGEAR_HOME, and that was when my comm cracked. They hadn't just piggybacked off my network. They had logged in, gone into the admin panel, reset everything, took control. It was subtle, silent, but unmistakable. They had reached into my system and rearranged it like they owned it, and I had no idea how long it had been happening. I sat in silence, heart racing, the hum of my refrigerator suddenly loud in the quiet house. I changed the password again. Then I changed the admin login. That should have stopped them, but it didn't. 2 days later, they were back. That night, as I sat in the dark staring at the router's blinking lights, I realized something with a cold clarity I couldn't unsee. This wasn't random. This wasn't a neighbor connecting once by mistake. This was calculated, repeated, deliberate, and worse, it was someone who lived close, too close, maybe even someone I'd smiled at. And just like that, my house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt watched, invaded. I stood in the middle of my living room, barefoot on the cold tile, router blinking like a heartbeat in the corner. And I whispered to no one, "Who the hell are you?" The next few days were quiet, but I wasn't. I became vigilant, not in a dramatic way, just sharper. My ears tuned to frequencies I'd never noticed. The timing of a TV show through the wall, the laugh of a child, the sound of a microwave beep from next door. The duplex I lived in was split down the middle. One side was mine. The other belonged to Jake and Emily, early 30s, 2 toddlers, a rescue dog that barked at wind. We weren't close, but we were neighbor-friendly. The kind that wave when dragging out the trash or nod over packages left at the wrong door. Jake wore hoodies and backwards caps. Emily always looked tired, carrying diaper bags like body armor. They had that chaotic young family energy, but they seemed kind, normal, harmless, until now. I started watching for patterns. Every evening around 7:30 p.m., my connection dropped. Every evening without fail. And then, like clockwork, I'd hear it. The muffled sound of animated voices, little kids laughing, something like a smart speaker calling out the name of a show. Playing Cocomelon on YouTube. And right then, I'd get the alert on my laptop. New device connected, Samsung TV, Galaxy Tab, Amazon Echo. My jaw clenched. I waited 5 minutes, then changed the password again. Boom, devices gone. 5 more minutes, they reconnected. How were they getting in? Then it hit me. I opened my browser and typed default router credentials. And there it was, the horrifying simplicity of it all. Username, admin password, admin. I never changed it. They didn't hack me. They didn't need to. They just logged in. I felt like an idiot, like someone who left their front door wide open and acted surprised when someone walked in and sat on the couch. But still, this wasn't just opportunistic. This was deliberate. They had gone into my settings, renamed my network, changed my password, and stolen my bandwidth, not just once, but repeatedly. And they never said a word, never knocked, never asked, just took. I kept remembering the time Jake asked if I wanted to split the cost of a snow removal service. I'd declined politely, I didn't need it, but he'd shrugged and said, "No worries? You're on your own schedule." Maybe that was it. Maybe they figured I was the quiet one, the non-confrontational one, the techie loner with noise-canceling headphones and a yoga mat. She won't notice. Or worse, she won't care. They were wrong. It's funny how betrayal doesn't have to come with shouting or broken glass. Sometimes it walks in wearing slippers, and leaves without turning off the lights. I started remembering small things. A month earlier, I'd caught Jake standing oddly close to the shared breaker box, said he was checking something. I didn't think twice. Twice that week, Emily had come over, with their toddler in tow, just seeing if you had any almond milk to spare. Now I wondered if they were just casing my space, sizing up how unaware I really was. It made my skin crawl, not because they were dangerous, because they were disrespectful, because they didn't think I'd do anything. They'd looked at my silence as permission, and I'd given it, not knowingly, but still, I had let this happen. I had believed in the illusion of neighborly decency, and I'd been wrong. So I started documenting everything, screenshots of router logs, notes of connection times, a spreadsheet that tracked device names, timestamps, signal drops, and restoration times. It made me feel better, not in a paranoid way, but in a reclaimed control kind of way. This was my system, my home, my rules, and they'd forgotten that. That weekend, I bumped into Emily while we both watered the tiny strip of lawn out front. Her toddler was babbling about dinosaurs and holding a juice box upside down. She smiled. "How's work going?" I nodded, forcing a polite smile. "Busy, but smooth when my internet behaves." There was a beat. She blinked. "Oh yeah, ours has been acting up too." I looked her dead in the eyes. "That's so?" She shifted, laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, Jake says we might need a new router." "It's been dropping randomly." I said nothing, just kept watering my half of the lawn. That was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to confront them. Confrontation puts the thief in the spotlight. But silence puts you in control. They'd taken something intangible, not just bandwidth, but dignity. And I was going to take something back. Not loudly, not with rage, with quiet, absolute, calculated precision. You don't realize how much you rely on something until it stops working. My internet, once invisible, became everything I saw. Every flicker of the connection light, every millisecond of lag, every delay in a message sent. I felt it in my skin. It became my pulse, my heartbeat. I couldn't focus on work. I couldn't relax during my downtime. I couldn't trust my own network. And when you can't trust your connection in your own home, you start questioning everything else. I started sleeping less, not because I was scared, but because I was awake, in the worst possible way. Hypervigilant, wired, alert. I'd lie in bed in the dark, listening for every creak, every beep, every voice through the wall. I knew their routines better than I knew mine. The kids were usually down by 8:30. Around 9, Emily would stream something trashy and loud. Around 10:15, the Galaxy tab would blink back online, probably Jake scrolling through fantasy football scores or Reddit threads before bed. I wasn't watching them through a window. I was watching them through mine, through my network. They didn't know I could see them. They had no idea how exposed they were. And I didn't know how much it was breaking me. I became obsessed with the admin panel. I'd refresh it 20 times a night. Write down new device names. Cross-reference MAC addresses. Set timers to predict when they'd reconnect. It wasn't about catching them anymore. It was about understanding why I felt so violated. This wasn't a robbery. They hadn't broken anything. They hadn't taken anything physical. But it felt like I was being touched without consent. Every time their devices lit up my logs, I felt it like a knock on my chest. They were inside something that was mine. Something I paid for, maintained, protected. They didn't knock, they didn't ask, they just walked in. The hardest part, no one could see it. I told a coworker once, offhandedly, "My neighbors keep stealing my Wi-Fi." He laughed. "Just put a password on it." I didn't correct him. What would be the point? There's no sympathy for digital wounds, no cast for emotional intrusion. People hear Wi-Fi and think inconvenience. But this was about boundaries. When my ex left, one of the last things he said was, "You're so calm, it's hard to know when you're hurting." It hit me like a slap disguised as a compliment. Because he was right. I don't yell, I don't rage, I shut down, withdraw. And maybe that's what Jake and Emily saw in me. A quiet neighbor who wouldn't fight back. A blank slate of a woman with blackout curtains and noise-canceling headphones and no drama. They didn't see a threat, they saw a resource. And that made me feel disposable. So I stopped trying to fix the symptoms. I started preparing for something deeper. I dove into tech forums, Reddit threads, cybersecurity blogs. I learned about MAC address filtering. I read about ghost networks and cloaked SSIDs. I ordered a new router, something advanced, customizable, impossible to reset remotely. It arrived in a brown Amazon box with no fanfare, but to me, it felt like armor. Still, I waited. I wasn't ready yet. I wanted them to get comfortable. One more week passed, then another. Each day I tightened a screw, created backup passwords, wrote scripts to autolog connection attempts, adjusted router placement to manipulate signal strength. It was like setting a trap, not to hurt them, but to cut off access without them realizing what was happening. One night, just before midnight, I got a ping on my phone. Unknown device. Name, guest iPhone. MAC address. I smiled. 2D:48. They brought over company and used my network to entertain them. I imagined them passing the Wi-Fi password across the table like a bread basket. No worries, just connect to Jamie's. I don't know if that was the moment I tipped from offended to something else entirely, but it might have been, because I didn't just want to block them anymore. I wanted to erase them from my network so thoroughly that they'd feel the loss without ever understanding it. The beauty of a quiet revenge is that it leaves the target confused, not wounded. They don't know what broke. They just know something changed, and it drives them mad. By the end of that week, my spreadsheet had over 70 connection events logged. I could predict their entire internet routine down to the minute. And I knew without question that this wasn't accidental. They'd been doing this for months, and what hurt the most, they had never asked, even once, even casually. Even with a, "Hey, our router's acting up. Mind if we hop on yours for a night?" They had smiled at me in the driveway. They'd waved. Their kid had drawn a chalk heart that overlapped into my walkway. And still, they didn't ask. It wasn't about money. I'm sure they could afford their own service. It was about entitlement, convenience, a belief that my silence was a green light, that I was weak, that I was too passive to push back. They weren't just stealing internet, they were stealing certainty. And when someone takes that from you, the basic, invisible trust that your space is yours, there's only one thing left to do. You take it back. Not with noise, but with precision. By the time I opened the box, it felt like I was unwrapping a weapon. The new router wasn't flashy, no sleek packaging, no smart this or eco that. Just cold, industrial-grade power. A brand recommended by cybersecurity professionals, the kind used in medical offices and law firms. I ran my fingers along the matte black edge and whispered to myself, "You're not getting in this time." It wasn't rage, it was resolve. They'd turned my home into a network of leaks and shadows. Now I would turn it into a fortress. The first thing I did was unplug everything. Hard reset. Old router boxed up, old cables snaked and twisted into the back of a drawer I never open. I cleaned the entire corner of my living room where the equipment had lived, like cleansing a crime scene. Then I rebuilt it. Not better, stronger. First, no broadcasting the network name. SSID hidden. The only way to even see the signal was to know it existed. Second, a randomly generated 32-character password. A mess of upper lowercase letters, numbers, symbols, and intentional gibberish. Third, I created multiple networks, one for my devices, one for work, one as a decoy, an open network named Free Wi-Fi _24 gigahertz. I throttled the decoy to crawl speed, enough to frustrate anyone who tried using it. I even programmed it to boot users every 15 minutes. A fake welcome mat, laid out just to trap greedy feet. Next, I installed MAC address filtering. My laptop, phone, and tablet were whitelisted. Everything else, denied on site. Even if they somehow guessed the password again, the router would pretend they didn't exist. Then I created a schedule. Wi-Fi on during specific hours. Silent at others, just in case they tried again. I used software to monitor device probes, the digital equivalent of someone knocking at a locked door. Each time a new MAC address asked to connect, I got a log. And then I did something deeply satisfying. I moved the router. No longer on the shelf near the front window. No longer broadcasting through thin drywall. I put it in the farthest corner of my bedroom closet, wrapped in aluminum-lined insulation foam, behind 2 metal filing cabinets and 3 boxes of old books. Signal dampened, directional range shortened, walls reinforced. From their side of the duplex, they'd be lucky to get a single bar. Then I waited. I didn't tell a soul. Not coworkers, not friends, not even my sister, who I vent to about everything. This wasn't something I needed validation for. This was something I needed to feel. To know that I could draw a line, silently, and hold it. The first night, around 7:10 p.m., I sat in bed with a cup of peppermint tea and watched my phone. At exactly 7:14, I got the alert. New device attempting to connect. Blocked. Another. Blocked. 5 minutes passed. 3 more tries. Different MAC addresses. Blocked. 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 Then nothing. Dead silence. And my connection. Flawless. The relief wasn't loud. It was like the absence of pressure on your chest. Like walking into a room where someone had been screaming and finding only stillness. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to dance. I wanted to scream back through the walls, try me again. But instead, I just sipped my tea, calm, centered. I watched an entire movie that night without buffering once. It felt decadent. The next day, the pattern repeated. Attempts, failures, then none. By day 3, their desperation became obvious. One device tried spoofing a MAC address already on my list, my work tablet. The router didn't buy it, blocked again. That night, I heard Jake cursing through the wall. Not loudly, not clearly, but enough to know he was losing it. I slept like a child. By the end of the week, I changed the password again. Not because I needed to, but because I could. I changed the decoy network name to Netgear_open and throttled it even harder. I turned on DNS logging just to monitor what they tried to access. They were still poking around, trying to find cracks, but I had sealed every seam. Then came the real cherry on top. I built a local landing page that popped up on any unapproved connection. A fake router admin screen that said, Too many connection attempts detected. Suspicious behavior logged. Network administrator notified. It wasn't true, but it felt true, and that's all that mattered. A few days later, I bumped into Jake at the mailbox. He looked tired, distracted. He asked me casually, "Hey, your internet working okay lately?" I blinked slowly. "Perfectly. Why?" He laughed a little too quickly. "Ours is being weird," I smiled. "Strange?" He nodded. "Yeah, might have to call someone." I didn't say another word, didn't ask, didn't offer help, just looked him in the eyes and said, "Good luck." He held my gaze longer than usual, then looked away. That night, they didn't try again. Maybe they finally gave up. Maybe they figured it out. Or maybe they knew deep down that something had changed, that the quiet neighbor wasn't so passive, that some boundaries don't shout. They resist, silently, unmovable, uncompromising. That's when I realized revenge doesn't need to be explosive. It just needs to be final. The first night everything stayed quiet, I barely noticed it. There were no connection alerts, no pings from unauthorized devices, no subtle dips in my video calls, just normalcy. And that's when it hit me. I had gotten so used to the intrusion that I'd forgotten what peace felt like. It wasn't until I heard myself exhale, long, slow, and full, that I realized how long I'd been holding my breath. My network was mine again. No intrusions, no interference, no shadows moving across my digital space. And the silence? It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a presence, a reclaiming. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine. Not a celebration, a ritual, something final. I sat on my sofa, feet tucked under me, router humming faintly in the back of the closet. I watched the blinking lights, not out of paranoia anymore, but out of reverence. They blinked like calm waves. No storms, no sudden jolts, just order. I scrolled through my logs, no attempts in 2 days. The activity graph was clean, flat, pure. They were gone. And not because I told them to leave, because I made it impossible for them to stay. That kind of power isn't loud. It doesn't come with raised voices or slammed doors. It's quiet, and it changes everything. The next morning, I saw Emily in the driveway. She was buckling one of the twins into a car seat. While the other one cried about a missing toy, she looked up. Our eyes met. There was something different in her gaze now. A cautiousness, a calculation. She gave a hesitant smile. I gave her nothing. Not anger, not a smirk. Just stillness. And that's what people don't expect when they cross someone like me. They prepare for confrontation. They never prepare for calm. Later that week, I caught a glimpse of a tech van parked in their driveway. A guy in a branded polo shirt was carrying a new modem up their steps, while Jake stood on the porch with his arms crossed, phone in hand. They were finally getting their own service installed. I watched from behind my blinds, sipping coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, not from the drink, but from the moment. This was my closure, not an apology, not an admission, just the sight of them realizing they'd lost access to something they never should have touched. And what stung them the most, I never said a word. No confrontation, no accusations, no demands, just absence. Absence of generosity, absence of access, absence of the quiet neighbor they thought would always be easy to exploit. And in that absence, they finally felt the weight of what they'd taken for granted. A week later, Jake knocked on my door. It was early evening. I had just finished a client call. I hesitated before answering. He stood there, trying to look casual. "Hey," he said, Hey, he scratched the back of his neck. So, weird question. You haven't had any router issues lately, have you? I tilted my head. No, everything's been perfect. Why? He gave a short, nervous laugh. We've been having crazy problems. Tech guy came out, said something about interference or signals being blocked or something. Thought maybe it was shared lines or walls or I don't know. I said nothing, just looked at him. Let the silence stretch. He looked past me, toward the corner of my living room where my old router used to be. He was searching for signs, clues, proof. I gave him none. Finally, I smiled, just slightly. Well, hope you get it sorted. Must be frustrating. He blinked, like he couldn't tell whether I was mocking him or not. I wasn't, not directly. He nodded. Yeah, thanks, I didn't say good luck this time. I just closed the door, slowly, softly, with finality. And on the other side of that door, I stood still. Not because I was shaken, because I wanted to remember the feeling, that calm, that control, that perfectly executed silence. People talk about revenge like it has to be messy, explosive, ruinous, but I've learned something else. The most devastating revenge is clarity. It's showing someone the cost of their behavior without raising your voice. It's not giving them the gift of your outrage. It's letting them spin, confused, powerless, trying to solve a puzzle they never even realized they were part of. Every night now, my connection is flawless. My network is untouched. My world is still. And I know they still wonder how I did it, when I figured it out, whether I ever really knew. That mystery? Let them keep it. Let them wonder. Let that silence echo louder than anything I could have shouted. It's been a few months now. Sometimes when I open my laptop and see how fast it connects, how steady the signal stays, I still smile. Not because I'm proud of the tech setup, although I have to admit it's a fortress. I smile because the silence has held. And in that silence, I've rebuilt something far more important than a network. I've rebuilt myself. For a while, after everything stopped, after Jake and Emily finally gave up and installed their own service, I expected something else to happen. A confrontation, an apology, a note, something. But nothing ever came. And slowly, I realized that the finality I was waiting for wasn't something they could give me. It had to come from me. So I made peace with the idea that they would never admit what they did. That they would probably retell this story to friends as some weird internet issue with our neighbor, glossing over months of freeloading and manipulation. And that's fine, because the truth doesn't need to be spoken to be real. I know what happened, and I know what it taught me. This wasn't about Wi-Fi. It never was. It was about permission, about how we teach people to treat us by what we tolerate. I had tolerated too much, not just from them, but from others before them. My ex, my old manager, a handful of friends who saw my calm as compliance. And it made me wonder, how many other places in my life had I left the door unlocked? Where else had I let people wander in and rearrange things, just because I didn't want to cause a scene? So I started locking more than just my network. I started locking myself down in the best way, not hiding, protecting. I unsubscribed from things that drained my time. I stopped answering texts from people who only reached out when they needed something. I cleaned out my apartment with a kind of precision I'd never had before. Clothes I didn't wear, gadgets I didn't use, old files, even furniture. Everything got reevaluated. If it didn't bring peace, it was gone. One Sunday morning, I walked around my home and realized it finally looked how I felt: intentional, uncluttered, quiet. The router sat tucked in its little nest in the closet, humming away like a loyal gatekeeper. Everything in its place, everything earned. The boundaries I put up didn't make me cold. They made me honest, and that honesty spilled into everything else. At work, I spoke up more. I stopped softening my words to make others comfortable. I stopped saying yes when I meant maybe. I gave feedback without apologizing for having an opinion. It felt strange at first, but then it felt right. There's a power in knowing where your edges are and letting other people bump into them if they must. I also started writing again, just journaling, nothing public. But the words came easily, like something that had been locked inside was finally free to breathe. It's amazing what happens when you're no longer exhausted by invisible battles. I even redecorated the guest room, not because I expected guests, but because I deserved a space that wasn't holding the ghost of someday. I filled it with things that made me feel seen. A reading chair, soft lighting, a photo of the Oregon coast I took the year I moved here. I thought a lot about what revenge is supposed to feel like. The movies make it dramatic: explosions, showdowns, the bad guy ruined in front of a crowd. But the truth? The best revenge is invisibility. It's the moment you stop needing them to know they lost. It's when you realize that peace is better than proof. That silence held long enough becomes sacred. I still see Jake and Emily sometimes. We pass in the driveway, exchange the barest nods. No more small talk, no more borrowed almond milk, no more illusion. And yet, I don't hate them. They showed me a boundary I hadn't known I needed to build. They taught me how to say no without speaking. And in their absence, I heard myself more clearly than I ever had before. The woman who stared at a blinking router in fear. She's gone. What remains is someone who knows that control isn't about locking others out. It's about letting yourself back in. So no, I don't think about the theft anymore. I think about the reclamation of space, of stillness, of self. And every time my screen loads perfectly, every time a video plays without buffering, every time my inbox syncs like a dream, I feel it again, that quiet victory, not against them, for me. If you've ever had someone cross a line without asking, and you took your power back without saying a word, tell me below. I read every comment. And if this story made you think twice about your own boundaries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.